we have got an amazing show set up for today. A lot of people have been watching these shows that John and I have been doing every night, special episodes. I think it's time for us to bring in a special team, so to speak. Like, you know, in football, they have the special teams. John, you and I were talking about the concept of four-dimensional investigation on our last, wasn't it the last show?
Yeah, last night. Yeah, we were looking at the Leica
Right.
geosystem or something like that, the 3D crime scene recreation thing, and you
Yes.
were you were explaining to the audience the four dimensions versus three
Right.
dimensions and all that. So yeah,
Well,
that was last night.
and that Leica stuff, it relies very heavily on a technique called photogrammetry, where very detailed 3D models can be reconstructed from photographs. And of course, we're getting lots of photographs and videos from the scene. Immediately, it came to mind that I happen to be personally acquainted with one of the world's foremost experts in photogrammetry, and his brother, who is also one of the world's foremost experts in digital technology as far as production goes. And I have known Lee Stranahan and his brother Kenny for almost 30 years, since 1996. I don't know if you've seen this, John. Let me play this for you here.
If you've been watching Lightwave videotapes, get ready for the next wave.
My name's Lee Stranahan. This is my brother Ken.
The Lenny CD-ROM is a 2-hour interactive video tutorial featuring Lee and Ken Stranahan. You'll learn the secrets of today's top Lightwave effects artists as they reveal the techniques used to make the coolest movies and TV shows. This 2-disc CD set isn't a bunch of rehashed material from the internet. It features all new tutorials not available anywhere else. An interactive video index and online Lightwave help leave ordinary videotapes in the dust. Additional tutorials from Andy Freerking of Dynamic Realities and PJ Foley of Foundation Imaging cover both Particle Storm and Fiber Factory. If you're serious about Lightwave, you'll love the Lenny CD-ROM.
So this was a seminar training people how to use advanced 3D animation technology in 1996. I realize a lot of that looks kind of low resolution and not that impressive today, but we have with us Lee Stranahan. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet John.
Great to have
It's
you, Lee.
great to
And
have you.
we're going to lean on Lee's expertise as we bring some new technology to this investigation. John, why don't you tell everybody what it is that we have in mind, what you've been discovering just in the past day, and then we're going to let Lee explain how we're going to proceed with all of this.
Well, first of all, it's a huge honor to have Lee on the show. I mean, Lee is really a legend in the industry. And for those of you that go back, there was a piece of technology that really changed video production back in the day called the New Tech Video Toaster. And the New Tech Video Toaster and Lee Stranahan are kind of, you can't separate the two. And so that really changed. I mean, this was really the watershed moment. This is when you didn't need to have a $1.5 million studio to put on a production because of this thing that Lee basically invented. So Lee is a legend
Which
in
is
the
small
industry.
correction. Lee did not
Okay.
invent it. He was part of the
Well,
team. He was a sales specialist and an application specialist, and he developed training for it.
but it was such a small core group of people that did this. I mean, you're talking about a handful
Yes.
of guys that changed the industry. Lee's a part of that
Absolutely.
crew.
Yeah.
And then goes on to do all this other stuff with and the technology keeps changing over the course of 30 years, of course, but Lee's understanding of the basics and the wireframe and all that, it's just amazing to get to work with you on something so important like this. So again, I'm really grateful for you.
This is very nice of you to
also-
say.
We also need to
was-
remember that Lee is also groundbreaking in the world of independent journalism, and he was basically one of the first guys to work with Andrew Breitbart and creating Breitbart.com, right, Lee?
I came in a little later, but I was Andrew's favorite journalist. So he
There
said
we go.
working with me was the best experience of his life. And we should also point out I've had a number of strokes, so that's why I talk funny.
Yes, before people start emailing me saying, oh, is your guest drunk? Let's please have some sympathy for Lee. He's a stroke survivor. And Lee, you're doing great. Your voice is sounding better all the time. And so why don't you give everybody a little bit of background on what it is we're intending to do and how this technology is going to play a role?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Great insights, guys. Thank you very much. I'll tell you a quick story. I was interviewing someone once. I was talking about my background in video toaster, and the guy was interviewing said, wait, I had your videotapes. I know who you are. I had your tapes. That guy was a young man named Alex Jones. So Alex Jones, back in the 90s, learned from my videotapes.
That's awesome.
And I'm sure your technology made stuff like InfoWars possible. Otherwise,
Correct.
he never would be able to afford to put that thing on, right? I mean,
Correct.
That's what
being
Alex
able
said.
to do all that background stuff and the Chiron stuff and, you know, very impressive stuff, Lee. It's really, really an honor to have you here. We were
Thank you
looking
very much.
Of course. We were looking at this 3D stuff just last night and a system from Leica. And when Jason mentioned you, I was like, "Are you kidding me? You know, come on. You know, it's like getting Mr. Lear to come in and check out your jet." It's like, yeah, of course you get him to come in. Yeah. So again, it's a real honor. Jason and I have been looking at this scene, this crime scene, in 3 dimensions, but I don't have the ability to do the kind of stuff that you do, like the stuff that you do, the stuff your brother knows how to do. It's outside of my wheelhouse. I don't know how to do the 3D type stuff, the wireframe stuff. And there have been people contacting me on Twitter, contacting Jason on Twitter, pitching in, helping out, providing some diagrams and stuff, providing some blueprints for things like the stands, providing blueprints for the venue. So we've been getting some interesting content, but having your expertise to bring to bear, and then Jason was introducing this notion of taking the 3D scene and then introducing that fourth dimension of time. And for the audience, for the younger guys out there, aren't you also an expert in the Unreal Engine? Like, isn't that one of the things that you've also worked in is Unreal?
Yeah, I'll talk about that as well. One
That's
thing,
huge. That's a super realistic environment. I mean, that's unbelievable.
and best of all, free. I got to point that out. Even these tools, like Lightwave 3D, the program that I was showing, Jason was showing, I used. Even back in the day, it was like $800 or $1,000. Unreal Engine is totally free, multi-platform. You can use it in Windows, Linux, or the Mac. It works on all three. And unless CrowdStrike kicks you down your Windows computer, but leave that aside for a second. Today, I want to lay out this project. And the reason I'm really excited is because the day after the assassination attempt on Trump, I think you remember this, Jason. I did a video. I said, we need an independent investigation, independent of Congress. And I was suggesting the Republican Party or Trump or someone, Elon Musk, finance that because that could pay for stuff like travel. But even without financing, we're doing this. And let me talk about why I thought that was so important. Back when I was a radio host, and a reporter at Breitbart in the White House, when the Russiagate thing, I started investigating that. One of the first things I did was when I started to get it, I studied the JFK assassination. You might think Russiagate, what does this have to do with it? I could tell that the CIA and the deep state were heavily involved in Russiagate. Now, of course, a lot of people don't know that now, but it was obvious to me what was going on. So I started looking into the CIA and JFK. And the JFK assassination is still, I think, now, Jason, I know you know a bit about it. How much do you know about this, the JFK background?
It's one of my areas of expertise. I was once just standing in Dealey Plaza where Robert Groden was signing books, and people were gathered around him asking all kinds of questions. And just from getting into conversation with people around there and answering their questions, Robert Groden looked up from his book signing table and looked at me and said, "You really know quite a lot about this." So I know more than the average person, I think, particularly my age.
So now let me say this. Feel free to disagree if you think I'm wrong. This JFK assassination, I think, is very instructive for the information, the disinformation, the lies about it that started coming out right away. You know, and one thing, example, when I started investigating JFK, this is like 5, 6 years, seriously, I read a bunch of books on it, And the first book I read was actually a book that I now think is wrong. It's a book called Legend. And Legend basically was saying Oswald was a Russian plant. And when I read into it, do you know that book, Jason?
I haven't read it, but I am aware of Oswald being in Russia, and there are still questions about that remain unanswered.
Okay, let me answer some of them. This is not a Russian plot, first off. And the guy pushing this in the book was James Angleton, James Jesus Angleton.
Oh, well, he's a CIA guy.
Oh, yes, and he used to be in a club, like the Naval Club or something in D.C., talking to everybody about JFK and pushing the Russian theory. And you know who else wrote a book about Russia being behind JFK's assassination recently?
I don't know.
James Woolsey.
Oh, boy. He's a fellow at the London Center for Policy, where he's interacting with people like Robin Gritz. I think they've disbanded, but there were former FBI and CIA. Anthony Schaefer was in there. He's a bad guy, Woolsey.
And Woolsey is also on the board of Virginia Energy, but that's another story. So when you look at Woolsey's book on JFK, you'll find it's pushing the idea that Russia is behind it. So two major CIA guys. The
Is
CIA,
that Operation Dragon, Lee? Is this it?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. This book proves, so supposedly that Russia's behind it. So what I'm saying is, if you know the information environment about JFK, you'll see a lot of bullshit coming, if I can say that, coming out from the CIA. And so I could see the danger in this. I knew that if for instance, the investigations, it wouldn't surprise me.
Whoops, I think you froze, Lee.
Kamala announces pretty soon.
Wouldn't surprise you if what?
Okay. Kamala Harris.
I think we're losing internet.
The Clinton
with Lee.
Commission to investigate the.
You're cutting out there. You wouldn't be surprised if Kamala Harris did what? Sorry.
Announced the Hillary Clinton Commission, like the Warren Commission.
Oh, exactly.
Because it would be like the Warren Commission, which had Alan Dulles on it. And anyone who knows JFK knows Dulles hated
JFK, and JFK wanted to disband the CIA. Alan Dulles is a very important figure in the history of the United States and in the history of the CIA. I agree with you completely, Lee. The JFK assassination is extremely instructive to people who are curious about what went on July 13th, 2024. I highly recommend researching any and every aspect of the JFK assassination because, Lee, I think the one important difference between the JFK assassination and the attempt on Donald Trump's life, I cannot imagine that they planned to miss. And it feels very much to me, particularly today, and I'm going to ask John for his opinion on this, but it feels to me like because they didn't have a contingency plan for missing, we had one day, which was Saturday, July 13th, where we were ahead, maybe 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, the 13th and 14th. I think we were ahead of the game. But what I detect, John, and it's accelerating today, is a disinformation operation has been spun up. And in certain regards, it's directly targeting information that you, John, and that I have brought to the fore. Have you noticed that, John?
Oh, yeah. I mean, come on. We have Brandy Zadrozny and NBC writing hit pieces within days. So they clearly knew we were ahead of the story. And now it's all, it's all hands on deck. And you're seeing people that you would expect to show some intellectual curiosity towards a second shooter or, so on and so forth. Just to see evidence. In other words, we're not even 2 weeks from the event. If there was evidence of blankety, 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 blank, wouldn't you want to see that? If I told you there was evidence of a bunch of clowns on stilts that walked through the through the crowd at one point, you say, get the hell out of here. You got to show me that, right? Come on. What do you mean there were clowns on stilts? How do we miss that? You wouldn't say, nah, I don't need to see that. So to me, it's like, why would anybody want to not look at certain bits of evidence or dismiss certain eyewitnesses. It doesn't make sense to me. And that's why it comes back to, for me, the modeling of the scene. Because like Lee is saying, and you were saying this the other day, and quite frankly, I need to apologize because Jason was making the very similar comparison that you're making, Lee. And Jason was saying, this kind of reminds me of JFK type stuff. And I'm like, come on, man, this could be Dylan Klebold, Eric Harris 2.0. Could be. But then as the investigation went on over the course of the last 10, 12 days, it became more and more sophisticated, and it kept falling into the stuff that Jason kept saying. Like this 3D kill box, and he was talking about JFK just as you were. And sure enough, I'm sitting here going, son of a gun. He was right. You're right. You're both basically singing from the same hymnal, just on a different night. Jason was saying this last night as well in the show. So I respect what both of you guys are saying, and I have to kind of hold my head low a little bit because you're both kind of right.
No.
Well, again,
we're
I
going to
go in
learn
like
from
a dummy.
this moving forward. No one's going to solve this case. No one's going to solve this case in 2 weeks. And, something that came up that's not necessarily directly related to what we're going to talk about tonight, but my day was super busy today. There's somebody who went through like frame by frame on this Chuck Grassley video. And
you're going to get us. No. Stop. You're going to get us the 18 again, dude. Stop.
I keep forgetting. Damn it. So this is why people have to join us on Odyssey and subscribe. I'm sorry, John. This is the thing. This is critical evidence.
Explain to people what's
going to happen is the YouTube video is going to get hit by YouTube as containing content that's not safe for all audiences. It won't be able to be shared on Subscribestar and Patreon and Substack, and it's going to get minimized in terms of, it's a good point, John. I totally forgot about that. But this is breakthrough evidence that basically proves that the FBI and the cops have been lying, very likely proves that first law enforcement photo that was leaked.
Oh my God!
Was photoshopped. Here, you can see it now, but they can't.
Yeah. No. Okay.
The audience can't see that. You can see that, but we can't.
You just showed me. You got me. It's like, dude, you got me. It's like you had me at hello.
Do you see where I got that from? They didn't redact it because this guy's ear. Well, because now it's not gory. The way I found
we'll go through this with the patrons. Let's go through it with the patrons because we can't show this to the audience right now. So that's not fair.
I just showed it again.
But, all right, Jason is showing Lee and I digital artifacts that.
We'll go through it with the patrons. You're right. Forget this for now.
Jason's on to something huge. But again, I want to come back to Lee's area of expertise. So people are familiar with stuff like Blender. They're familiar with some of the 3D wireframe type stuff. And what we've been doing is looking at the venue and this notion of the 4D concept, the idea that you've got a 3D venue, but there's things happening in time. Like Jason said, at one point, the crane is up in the air, but at another point, the crane is down. And that changes everything. That changes things, right? So that's this 4D thing as I understand this. Jason explained it last night. Lee, do you want to talk more about the whole notion of this 4-dimension, adding the 4th dimension to the 3-dimensional scene?
Yeah, I do. But before I do that, let me talk about the 3 dimensions. Because, again, I don't assume people know a little about the CGI. Just they've seen movies and stuff. But I want to do a real basic, simple explanation of 3D graphics. May I please?
Please do.
Yeah, of course. Please.
So Jason, go to that. Go back one. Yeah, that's a good place to start with the mug. So what 3D graphics are, on the left here we have a realistic scene, and on the right is how it really looks to the computer. These objects are made of what are called polygons. A polygon is a surface, basically, like this would be a polygon, okay? And objects are made up of a bunch of polygons. Now, by the way, if anything I'm saying is not clear, either of you guys stop me, because I want everyone to get what this project is. Because really, it's important to understand this stuff. So typically the way you make an object back in the day it's almost like building Legos, or in some cases, like sculpting with clay. You'd start with a polygon, put another polygon next to it, and no, Jason, makes sense?
Yeah,
Almost
people
like
understand that we're breaking these things down to their core elements. Everybody can see that we've got triangles here, and the surfaces all connect to one another. These are solid objects, and I think people can even get the idea from this image that the more polygons we have, the more detail we can represent. And then, Lee, how does the image get from this flat, grayscale, cartoony, polygonal-looking thing into this photorealistic-looking thing?
Well, what happens is they apply surfaces to them. So they apply it like a texture, like color and specularity, which is shininess, and also diffusion, reflectivity, and so they give it a surface. In many cases, it's an image. So like that wood grain on the table. Me personally, I take an image of wood, and you project it onto the polygons. That makes sense. So
Absolutely.
This is basics of 3D. Now go to a graphic of the guy.
Well, before we leave this image, I'd just like to add, in addition to putting the picture of the wood on the surface, we can apply various characteristics and properties so that the simulated light within the computer will reflect. In other words, the mug is intended to look like a ceramic cup that's been in a kiln, and it's going to have certain reflective properties that differ from wood. And all of that is dialed into this scene, right?
And yes, and the reason that the graphics from '96 look, I mean, duh, but the reason they look more basic is because computers back then were much slower and had much less memory and stuff. So in other words, like to do a mug like that was a big deal back then. But the more complex, the more polygons object has, the more complex it is. So go to the person for a second. So something like a person obviously has a lot more polygons. People, unless you know some people like this, they're not flat. Just people have curves and all kinds of like look at your eyeball. It's to do a circle so it looks round and realistic. You need a lot of polygons. So the faster computers, and even I'll put it like this: my phone is like a zillion times faster than my computer used to be. Jason,
Right.
you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the computers that we were using in 1996 to do this stuff, Lee, sometimes the process of going from the wireframe to a photorealistic image involves rendering, which is the computer calculating actual rays of light hitting these surfaces and creating a realistic simulation. Rendering just one frame in a computer in 1996 sometimes would take more than a day. Now, with Unreal Engine and graphics cards from NVIDIA and things like that, these things can be rendered in less than 1/30th of a second. So it gives us real-time video.
And also, one difference from today, the Trump assassination attempt, and from JFK is phones. Because imagine if everyone at the Dealey Plaza had a camera. We had one Zapruder film, one person basically was taking it. Today, we would have 100 Zapruder films available right away.
Yeah. Some would argue that there were 4, but we've only seen 1, and the other 3 were destroyed. But that's a separate conversation for another day. You're absolutely right, Lee. There are key differences between the JFK assassination and this Donald Trump attempt. And these types of differences that you're talking about, we're going to get into this during the sponsor exclusive segment, because I know John wants to talk about how all these phones, in addition to the photo and video evidence, they provide us with acoustic evidence. And as you're saying, we had one Abraham Zapruder shooting silent film. We now have hundreds, if not thousands, of points of data collection, and it's going to become very important to preserve this data. We want to integrate eventually all of this data into this 4-dimensional investigation. And Lee, you had some ideas for an open source aspect of it as well, didn't you?
I'll come and talk to you in a second. We're building that, Jason. But yes, I want to make all this data we're going to produce be open source and free, basically. We'll talk about that. So now show the building image, Jason, for a second. Because
by the way, that open sourcing makes it extra important for people who want to see this project succeed to sponsor Lee on patreon.com/Stranahan. You can go there, and Lee has his own Patreon page. He simulcasts the shows we do together on Crowdsource the Truth, but he's also got a load of exclusive content, and this fourth dimensional investigation is going to be happening there as well as other places. So it's a great time to subscribe to Lee on Patreon.
And thank you. So we've been talking about 3D graphics, but let me introduce another concept: computer-aided design or computer-aided drafting, CAD. Okay, so like anyone who's looked at and done architecture or any stuff like that have seen CAD. It's basically looks the same, but let me point out one of the big differences between CAD and graphics. Like if my brother designs a spaceship, okay, or a car, or whatever, if he designs something and it's not realistic, no one dies. So if you're designing a building, on the other hand, it's not just important that the graphics look nice, but the building needs to be structurally sound or people die. You know, like if I made a building, does that make sense, Jason?
Absolutely. I mean, what Lee is talking about, I met Lee and his brother Ken because we were doing stuff with visual effects. And Lee's work, Ken's work, has now expanded into photogrammetry, which we're going to talk about soon. But I mean, you guys have worked on so many movies, and Ken is just constantly busy doing all kinds of visual effects stuff. The point is, when you're making a movie, it just has to look good. When you're actually designing things for engineering, they have to function.
What's a great example? Let me ask you a quick question, Lee. What's a great example if people wanted to see this Unreal environment? They said, you know, well, what are you talking about? Because I'm testing my understanding of what you just said, is that in something like the Unreal Engine, you can model things that are not necessarily bound by the limits of physics or things like that.
Right.
You can change the lighting. You can say, let's put more cloud cover in. Let's increase the wind. You have variables. Yeah, here you go. This is so Lee, it's like this is hyper realistic. I mean, this is a level of realism. I mean, this is like PlayStation 5 type stuff, right? I mean, when the PlayStation 5 came out, you must have done a cartwheel. I mean, you must have been like, oh my God, this is not real. I mean, without the pun, right?
Well, for a few years, I got out of 3D graphics because I was busy reporting. So during those years, you know, I kept a toenail in it, but I wasn't really paying attention. And then I had some time, so I decided, again, I'd been out of 3D graphics about 5 years. Everything had changed. And I saw that the programs like Unreal were capable of producing photorealistic graphics in real time. So like your background right there, I assume you're not actually sitting in a room that's blue and purple and looks like that.
It is.
No, I am. I actually am. Yeah, I don't have a green screen. I've got a red light over here. Look, I got a red light over here, and I got a blue light over here. This is real. Yeah. Don't forgive me. I'm sorry.
Okay, because my apartment, Jason's seen my apartment, actually kind of looks like that. But I keep my place very surreal. But my point is that I saw what the graphics were capable of doing. The graphics cards got amazing, and video games like Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto 5 or something like that. I saw that they were capable of doing basically movie quality photorealistic images in real time. And I said, this really changes. So in my old radio show, Jason knows this, we used to do like an environment in real time. Right, Jason?
Yeah, for the simulcast on YouTube, right.
And that environment all rendered in real time just to make cool graphics. But the reason I brought up CAD is because I want you to think about what we're doing here in this project. Dealing with the Trump assassination, we're not trying to just make something. It's not like Jason's Oliver Stone and he's hired me to do graphics for a film, let's say, in which case all I care about is what looks good. Make sense?
We have to keep this accurate to physics and the real world, because we're not going to, if we make a simulation that does something that can't happen, it's obviously not what happened on July 13th.
And like take the water tower. I could make a model that looks good of the water tower. It looks good, but I could make it like 2 inches tall. And I could position it close to the camera so it would look good. It would fool you. Because another way to think of these 3D objects is like, I said Lego. Let me use another analogy. Paper mache. That's closer to it. Remember paper mache, Jason? You ever play with that?
Absolutely. Not so
Okay.
much. It was messy.
It is messy. And so, but my point is, if I had a realistic looking paper mache rock, look outside, entirely realistic. If I hit it with my fist, it's going to go through the paper and break the rock. I mean, crush it. And you don't want that. So, especially stuff like the size of things, like if we do a building, the rooftop, the sloped roof, the notorious sloped roof. I'm using it as an example because I don't want the angle. I want the angle to be exactly right. Does that make sense? And
Of course.
because we're doing it.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't just make sense. You're now making me realize the importance of something that I know of again just from kind of the PlayStation world, which is the properties. You're describing a rock that's yay big, but if it's made out of paper mache and it gets hit by a bullet, it's going to go flying across the room. But a real rock made out of granite, it's not going to do that. And so these properties that the objects have, like the railing and the system, the Unreal Engine knows how to deal with stuff like light and dust and rain.
Well, you're talking now about physics simulation, which is also very important, and that's another aspect.
I think
that's
that's what Lee's saying.
incredibly complicated. You're right. He is.
I think Lee's saying the difference between paper mache and granite is night and day. Shoot that rock, and that's the whole thing in Call of Duty. You go in Call of Duty, there's a different sound when you shoot the gun into the dirt than when you shoot the gun at the building. It's like everything has properties associated with it. And I think that's what Lee is talking about is the complexity now gets into the properties of the objects, right? And how they behave.
Yeah, and the difference between CAD and 3D, back in the early days of 3D, occasionally I'll be doing a demo and someone would come up to me and say, okay, I'm an architect. I said, nice to meet you. Okay. So they say, I can't use this. I said, why? They said, because it needs to be real. That looks good. The graphics look nice, but people will die. So that's why CAD programs, you remember this, Jason, whereas 3D programs were kind of expensive, like $800 or something. CAD programs were really expensive.
It's like 50 grand a year, and you have to re-up every year. Those are crazy. Those will tell you like when the aluminum will break and how much load it can take and stuff. That's really crazy stuff.
But 50 grand makes sense because you don't want your architect going, well, I can get on a sheet. I'll use Unreal Engine. It'll be. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so,
they don't do that.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense.
What we're doing in this project is, I would say, somewhere in between that level of risk, but closer to the CAD side. So when we're designing this, because let me outline the project broadly. We're going to create 3D models of this, and we're going to create a 3D scene of this using a number of tools, including photogrammetry. But just because you make a model in photogrammetry doesn't mean you stay. You have to bring it back into a program like Unreal or like Blender. So
now, sorry to interrupt, Lee, but we're butting up against our sponsor exclusive segment. So I want to just wrap up this part soon and go to Patreon and stuff. But just to touch on the photogrammetry, and this was what I started thinking of when John was showing that Leica software, because your brother Ken is one of the most accomplished and sophisticated photogrammetry experts in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is and what we're looking at here?
So back up, Jason. Do the Johnny Ramone one.
Oh, yeah, right.
Let's start with that. So the problem with modeling something like this by hand, the old school way, is it would take forever. It would never look realistic. Now, this is a statue of Johnny Ramone. Have you seen it, Jason, by the way?
I've never seen the real one, no.
But there's one in New York, and my brother's a punk, so he's a Ramones fan. And so he didn't model this. He didn't sculpt this. He took numerous photos of the statue. And this is highly detailed, a lot of polygons. I mean, if you look at it's an insane amount of detail. You would never be able to model this. It would take you months to model something like this. And even then, but this thing looks like the object. So this is based on photos. what he did was he took his cell phone, basically. I mean, because that your phone is a high resolution camera. He took a number of images of it, then he put them together. And we'll also, in the sponsor segment, talk about how you watching at home can play around with this stuff just to get a feel for it. Again, free. Again, and it's easy to use. Jason, I showed you how to use this viewer in like 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Super easy.
And grab one other simple object, Jason.
I like this. You go, Mongo, need air.
Diving helmet. Yeah. Diving helmet.
Yeah, right. And so my brother was sent on assignment to Pacific Northwest to a museum, basically, and they were locked in at night so they could take numerous photos of the object. Because again, modeling something like this would take a long time. So modeling the scene in Butler, Pennsylvania, if you had to model that from scratch, old school, forget about it. You would never do it.
Yeah.
So we're going to use the fact that a lot of people did take photos and took video, which again, what is video? It's
A lot of
bunch
photos. Yeah.
Right.
And you know, Lee, I had a pretty lengthy conversation with Kenny yesterday, and he was giving me all kinds of insight as to what we should be looking for, because there's some amount of data that we'll be able to capture by going back there and doing new photography, but really what we want is images of the bleachers and the farm equipment and the construction equipment that was there on the day. So we're going to have to rely on, you know, sort of catch can existing photography that people took. And we'll get into some of the things that Kenny said, but we're going to be dealing mostly with evidence and the new stuff that we found this week. People are going to be able to join us in just 5 minutes. We're going to be simulcasting today on patreon.com/Stranahan, where you can sponsor Lee, support this work and this investigation that we're going to be doing. Lee is a critical part of it, and we can't proceed without your support and sponsorship. And by going to patreon.com/Stranahan, you're also supporting independent journalism. If you haven't seen Lee before, it's a great time to follow him on X and to sponsor him on Patreon. People are also going to be able to sponsor John on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen. And patreon.com/IamJohnCullen. You can sponsor Crowdsource the Truth on Odyssey.com. Yeah.
Can I make one quick mention? I'm
Let me
going to
finish the plugs, Lee. You can sponsor Crowdsource the Truth on Odyssey.com/@CrowdsourceTheTruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com, and patreon.com/ damn it, I just didn't want to show that again. And you can follow me on X. Definitely get onto these sponsor channels where we don't have to worry about what we're showing. Lee, what did you want to bring up, and then we'll head over there.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
I'm a journalist too. And I was one of the main journalists on Russiagate and Ukraine. I was talking about Ukraine back in 2017. You remember that, Jason?
Absolutely.
So I'm working on a book now. I've got about 12,000 words written. The book is going to be out in a week, I think. It's going very well, about Russiagate and Ukraine. And tonight, if you join my Patreon for free, I'm uploading the first chapter of the book to my Patreon. So anyone who wants to know more about Russia, the Democrats, and the CIA, how they all, Ukraine, I misspoke. Ukraine, the Democrats, and the CIA, and the deep state, how they work together, and why Trump. I think Trump and Vance are a danger. This all, obviously proves it. But the danger they're in from this axis of evil, Ukraine, the CIA, and the Democrats. And my book goes into a lot of detail. So sign up for free on my Patreon channel. And tonight, that first chapter is going to be up there.
Excellent. So people will be able to check that out and join us in just 5 minutes. We'll be right back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. You're not going to want to miss this. We've had so many major breakthroughs, even just since last night. It's kind of nuts. Stay with us.